conjunction with other emerging technologies can help bring possibilities into the real world. So I think it's fair to say that big cities today are starting to get crowded. So one prediction of the future says that 2/3 of the world's population will live in urban areas by the year 2050. On our roads, there are around 1.4 billion cars worldwide, and that consists of around 1 billion passenger vehicles and nearly 4 million commercial vehicles. And this is also increasing every single year. Power supply systems that were once okay to meet those demands won't cope with these changes easily, and the environment is of course suffering as well. And along with those physical demands, our society's demands are also growing. They're demanding more choice of services, quicker and reliable access to information, and an ability to travel from A to B in a way that they choose with as little waiting time as possible. Government agencies and private companies are struggling to coordinate with each other and make sense of data. And that data itself is very often siloed and unavailable. And companies want to kind of ring fence that data for the fear it was going to fall into the hands of the quote unquote competition. So all the devices out there in cities are becoming more sophisticated over time, but they don't really talk to each other very well. And the data they produce is not really available for wider consumption. So there is a vision of the future, and it's called the smart city. And this is what Wikipedia has to say. A smart city is an urban area that uses different types of electronic Internet of Things, sensors, to collect data, and then use insights gained from that data to manage assets, resources, and services efficiently. This includes data collected from citizens, devices, and assets that's processed and analyzed to monitor and manage traffic and transportation systems. Wikipedia gives other examples for example, power plants, utilities, water supply networks, waste management, and there's a few more. So what can technology bring? Well, the Internet of Things includes devices that can potentially connect to enable many different features for people of cities and countries. So let's think for a second, what devices do we have now and devices yet to be invented or created that could be used in an intelligent and connected way? There's reading devices such as traffic meters measuring traffic flow, video cameras, sound pickup devices. There's light meters and real-time online data sources such as how many people are on buses, how many people are on trains or are boarding trains, how many vehicles are in the city centre over the last couple of days, and so on and so forth. Then we have things that have some kind of output or control, traffic intersection lights, warning signs about incidents or congestion, devices that will contact an emergency response team automatically. And then there's the vehicles themselves, private cars, taxis, Ubers, minibuses. So all in all, there's this vast number of things involved in cities and transporting people today. If all of them could be wired up and used intelligently, it could really increase efficiency and create a powerful ecosystem to provide a lot of value to our stakeholders. If you bring AI and machine learning into the mix, along with some deep data analysis, and you gain insights and accurate forecasts from this range of listening, seeing, and sensing things. And this in a way that would be very difficult to do with traditional algorithms and logic. So who are the groups of people that benefit from all of this stuff? So what you can see here on this slide are just a few of the groups of stakeholders who could consume data or benefit in some way. And we can probably make a useful distinction here with two different groups, end users and agencies or organizations who control the key infrastructure. Now for the end user group, creating services based on interconnecting devices and using data intelligently can help to make journeys more efficient. When people travel around a city, they have different reasons for traveling. They're traveling to go to work, they're looking at tourist sites, they're meeting friends. They've got different preferences of how they get there. But most people just want to get from A to B in the quickest possible time. And some will only ever want to be in a vehicle, and others will have a preference to use public transport always. Now, one of the constraints today in public transport is that everything is on a fixed schedule. It doesn't change. Bus timetables, train timetables, shuttle timetables. There's some allowance for peaks and troughs in demand, such as working day versus non-working day, or rush hour versus daytime. But what could make this really interesting is if it adapted to changing situations. In this way, if you're a traveller, it could feel like transport is just always there when you need it, in whatever form you'd like it to be on your journey. If you travel in a city now, this may seem a long way off and a bit of a dream, but solutions can move towards this. So this concept is known as mobility as a service. And I mentioned this is a long way off, but we are starting to see innovation in this area. Now, the push for all this stuff is coming from two sides, really. First off, we have the end users and their demands on the system. And these are all the people traveling. Secondly, this is coming from tackling environmental issues like reducing CO2 emissions, for example. Now, making all this happen is going to take coordination and trust between all these different players. In the traditional private sector that we have today, entities are in a kind of ongoing battle with each other for revenues, for customers, for reputation, unless they happen to be a monopoly, of course. But in the smart city concept, we need to turn that on its head from a system of competition to one of collaboration. And I think the key to all this is that word, collaboration. If companies are incentivized to share data and work together, then this opens the door to great things. The journeys are going to be easier to plan, energy will be saved, traffic flow will have less extreme peaks and troughs. Enter blockchain. So where does blockchain fit into all of this, and where can it help? What are some of the key concepts that will overlap a few of the cases for smart cities? First of all, it can help in creating an ecosystem that connects all the different players and devices, plus all the public organizations, private companies that control the traffic systems and network devices. And if we want an efficient system, that needs to start with a common data store. It can also be used to form the ecosystem for tokenization, and we'll talk about this a bit more shortly. Then there's proving that something is yours. If you own a car, a bike, a flat, a van, or whatever, you can have a digital representation of this on-chain as an immutable record. There's also automation of agreements. So what we have today in hundreds of pages of legal documents, online or on paper, could be moved into a transparent online version in computer code. And similar to that kind of programming legal obligations, the day-to-day management and decision-making of our cities could be written into a kind of workflow automation system, which is transparent, tamper-proof, and the concept of the DAO, or the DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization. So I mentioned earlier about coordination and trust between our different stakeholders. So in order for all these devices and all these stakeholders to identify and trust each other, they all need to do this in a way that doesn't rely on large centralized companies and data stores. And we'll talk about this idea of decentralized ID and trust in a little more detail later. So tokenizing. So tokenization in the context of blockchain is the process of issuing a blockchain token to represent an asset. It could be like a car, apartment, or something else that has some value, like a train ticket. Now, for any type of asset, be it a car or your house, a proof of ownership could be transacted onto the blockchain as a token, and that token can serve as a proof that you are the rightful owner. This means that traditional agencies don't need to hold the records themselves. Now, Georgia, and that's the country, not the US state, are trying this kind of thing for real by placing real estate title deed information on a public blockchain. This helps mitigate the risk of losing records and potential theft of title deed information. The distributed ledger is aiming to take away those problems and serve as immutable proof that you do indeed own your asset. And when you have a very digital way of proving ownership, this would also open up something called fractional ownership, where your asset could be co-owned by a couple of people or many people, each sharing responsibility and equally taking any income made from that. And this is true democratized ownership. So as we know today, for young people trying to get onto the property ladder, this can be very difficult, especially if they have small incomes. But if a property could be divided into 100 shares, it could have 100 equal owners. So a $100,000 property would have 100 owners, all owning $1,000 worth of that property. The distributed ledger could clearly, securely, and transparently hold those ownership details. And each owner would benefit in any increase in price, and at the same time would benefit from any income, for example, if the property was rented. Now, smart contracts on-chain could also handle all the buying and selling of those shares, as well as the legal aspect of renting and any payments as well. We should point out that you can, of course, currently arrange co-ownership of property, but this is often complex, it's time-consuming, and it's going to involve at least one legal firm. Now, in addition to ownership, your right to use and an owner's obligations can also be set up on-chain. This could be a house rental agreement or a car lease contract, for example. So parking lots or parking spaces could be tokenized, and these things are always going to be tied back to some kind of cryptographic personal ID that you possess. And once you've got your parking space on the blockchain, second layer systems could enable people to rent your space, and things could get very automated. Detection devices, transponders in vehicles, and digital currency payments could enable nice revenue streams for parking space owners. So in our new smart city, with all this going on, we're going to find that there are many new opportunities for monetization. Away from parking, you may have heard of international carbon trading, for example, which is an existing international system. That's effectively the right to emit CO2. This market has been created to buy and sell units, which permits the holder to emit a given amount of CO2. And the idea is that the total of all those units in circulation equals the target that all countries have set in order to reduce emissions by a given amount over a set period. Now, market forces control the cost of these units at any one time. So how about a similar system at a micro level to control the amount of traffic flowing into a city centre at any given time, for example? For example, currently in London, a congestion charge kind of discourages the mass entering of petrol traffic into the inner zones of the city. But this charge is fixed and isn't fluid to real-time demands and situations. It takes no account of traffic conditions at certain times. What if a service could establish current demand for traffic, coupled with things like current capacity and weather conditions? A token could be created in a blockchain system, and that could represent the right to travel to the city centre, for example. Current conditions would dictate the price, and drivers could buy and sell them as required, depending on their travel needs for a given time of day. And then a dynamic marketplace would emerge. In times of heavier traffic on your way into town, you can even negotiate with vehicles around you, with crypto payments, for example, sort of depending on how much of a hurry you're in. You could even give way to other vehicles who are in more of a hurry than you, and you could be paid for this by receiving micropayments in cryptocurrency. So this is just one idea of possible monetization of all this good stuff. And there's data itself, which could also become a commodity. So all of those sensing things I mentioned earlier, light meters, traffic sensors, parking lots, CO2 sensors, could all produce data which is highly available, verifiable, and consumable. And the consumers here would be other devices or other online services. It all has value to business, and new business models are going to emerge. Imagine an owner of a private parking space installing a sensor to tell if their space is currently occupied. If this data is publicly available, a public agency could consume this and combine it with other data sources to plan public parking needs for a given time and act as a real-time guide to availability. Another example, multiple carbon monoxide sensors could publish data and receive auto payment in the form of a digital currency. In this case, an app could be created that generated real-time insights on pollution, for example. And one more example, a shuttle bus service could consume traffic meter data to plan its upcoming routes and make small micropayments in real time to whichever data service it's consuming. And that's just device data we're talking about. What about our data, our location, our buying habits, our views and opinions? So a lot of this is being used right now, both with and without our knowledge. And this data has huge value to companies looking to sell their products and services. Personal data is a valuable resource and it's never going to run out. And so if us as individuals can control it and pass it only to those who we want to use it, this could prove a nice income stream for many. Now, another exciting market-making opportunity with blockchain would be the exchange of electrical energy, especially with the rise of alternative energy. It's been predicted that cities are going to move away slowly from fossil fuels and see a huge rise in the number of small operators generating their own power through small-scale wind or solar sources. The demand for energy on any given day and time fluctuates a great deal, often in a quite unpredictable way. And so there will often be cases where the amount of energy being produced differs greatly to the demand at that time. It will become more difficult for system operators to balance out this supply and demand, and this is going to hugely impact maintenance and operations on the macrogrid. So small operators or even individual houses could have their spare stored power consumed by their neighbours for crypto payments. In case when there's energy shortage and there are electric cars in the area that are fully charged but not being used, the owners of those cars could instantly sell units of energy and have it transferred to the grid wherever it's needed or directly to someone else in the area in a kind of peer-to-peer fashion. So car owners could potentially make a decent income this way, and digital currency payments could also be handled on the blockchain. Now, there's also the potential to improve administration of all this stuff. So our electric meter readings, for example, can be transferred on chain. Renewable energy certificates are produced when a reusable energy source creates energy, but the admin around them is far from transparent, and the process involves many parties in an inefficient system. So right now, when a renewable power plant generates a unit of electricity, this needs to get recorded. A meter produces data. This ends up on a spreadsheet. This is then sent to a registry provider. It gets entered into another system, and finally, the certificate is created. Another group of middlemen basically broker deals between buyers and sellers for those certificates. And then one more party verifies the certificates after they're purchased. Now, all of this involves transaction costs and a big chance of many human errors along the way. If all this process were handled with smart contracts on a distributed ledger, you could have full transparency, accurate data collection, and secure trading of all the certificates. So we've touched on the idea of smart contracts already. So this is like a tamper-proof program on the blockchain that can enforce agreements between two or more parties to ensure that legal obligations are fulfilled. In this way, you can create a so-called trustless environment that avoids multiple agencies. It could even have automatic inputs and outputs. So imagine a legal company that's given a contract to install and run traffic lights in a city district. You can see how they might want to build certain metrics and obligations into an agreement, such as guaranteed 99% uptime or 99% signal reliability. Other Internet of Things devices could monitor and record all this data, and then penalties could automatically be incurred if they don't meet their obligations. So these things could be written as blockchain smart contracts, audited by a third party, and then set to run, for example. Okay, open and decentralized identity. As we touched upon earlier, all the people and devices we've talked about need some way of being identified and trusted on this ecosystem when they're interconnected. They're all going to need some method of identification or trust. They're going to need a standard language and a protocol that's going to gain traction. And we'll need infrastructure to remove the responsibility of identification and trust from these orgs and instead have ID work in a very decentralized way. In the real world right now, ID is controlled and secured by centralized organizations. Traffic signals are controlled by a highways agency, for example, mobile phone connections within a network provider, current bus location data from a specific technology provider, and so on. So we need an alternative. Fortunately, there's a lot of work going on in this area right now, and this is known as DID, or Decentralized ID. In this decentralized model, data used to check that an ID is authentic is held on a public decentralized ledger, and the control and ownership over those ID credentials is very much down to the individual. This is why the term self-sovereign identity, or SSI, is used, and these things are being very actively researched. And we're talking about both people and things here, remember. But to focus on people for a moment, we can think about how our ID works in the real world. So let's use the example of a driver's license. So autonomous self-driving vehicles are going to be with us one day, but until then, we all need a driver's license that proves we have the skills to drive a car. Now, a driver's license, wherever you drive in the world, is nearly always issued by a government agency. And here in the UK, this is the DVLA. So they issue a physical document and keep a copy of your details in a centralized database, maybe with some backup somewhere. Anyone who needs to verify that the document is genuine can contact the DVLA and check. And I would say this generally works okay. But there are many potential issues around this. First off, there's the data loss risk. A lot of investment is needed to keep the driver's license information safe from accidental loss, but at the same time, highly available to those who need it. Secondly, there's a trust issue. And by this, I mean the risk of a bad actor within the organization stealing and then passing on or selling information to a third party, maybe. On the data loss risk, the risk is higher the more centrally you hold and manage the data. Now, on the trust issue, we know that large corporations hold a significant amount of our data linked to our name or address, for example, and that can be used for things without our knowledge. Okay, personally, I do trust our DVLA, but the number of companies we need to give our personal data to is growing all the time, and that trust we need in them is increasing. There's our bank, our employer, loyalty schemes, companies we buy from regularly, government agencies, social services, investment companies. And with many of these, every time you need to join a scheme or sign up with a company, you nearly always need to go through some kind of KYC sign-up process. This often means showing the same set of documents that you've shared many times before. Decentralized ID is looking to change this by moving the proof of ID to a decentralized system using blockchain. Now, in this model, using clever cryptography, an identity document can be held by you, and you can be in full control of what happens to it. To return to a travel scenario for an example, let's imagine a case where I want to board a plane, and I need to show some form of ID to do so. So it's going to go something like this. So I'm lucky enough to have passed my driver's test, and I request a license from a driver's license agency. They create a digital version of a credential. The agency creates a signature of the license with a private encryption key. I download the digital credential to an app on my phone or mobile device and countersign the digital credential with my encryption key. Sometime after that, I go to board a plane. I present my phone to the agent, maybe a QR code or a barcode or something is going to display on the app, and the airport's going to scan that. Along with maybe some biometric data, the airport system will then look up details on the blockchain by resolving the DID documents for both myself and the driver's license agency. And hopefully this happens very quickly, maybe just in a second or two as I'm waiting for the plane. So using public key technology and key signatures, the agent at the airport is able to establish 3 important things about my digital credential. 1, it was issued by the agency. 2, it was issued to me specifically. And thirdly, it hasn't been revoked, it is still valid. So after that, the airport boarding staff is hopefully happy and I can board my plane. Okay, this was a little simplified, but what's happened here? I've received the credential, I've stored it securely and presented it to a party who needs to verify it, and it's never left my phone. Now this has quite a profound implication. Because all this proof exists on the blockchain, or on-chain as we say, the driver's license agency has no need to store a copy of the digital driver's license themselves, or even details for future reference. We would hold a secure copy on our device on a special app, maybe with a backup on the cloud somewhere. And if for some reason we lose this, the agency could easily produce another one based on the information on the blockchain. Now, switching back to all those devices we're going to need to power our smart city, our traffic signals, light meters, energy meters, data sources, autonomous vehicles, every single one of those will need some form of identification and a way of determining if we can trust that ID. They'll need certificates to determine what they are, who created them, how to interact with them, and a means to prove all that to other devices. If my car needs to communicate with some kind of traffic signal, for example, they need to first identify each other and handshake. Now, if the identity of both of those things is held on blockchains, then doing this becomes very simple. And there's one more, I would say, very interesting possibility here. The certificate and the authentication could be designed in such a way that you don't even need to reveal other attributes of yourself, such as your name and address. If we think about how ID works in the real world now, it's very difficult to reveal certain attributes about yourself without giving away others as well. If a young person wants to buy alcohol, they need to prove their age by showing a vendor an ID that shows their date of birth. And this would normally mean showing a document that also has your name, your address, and your date of birth. And all you really needed to show was your date of birth. Taking this one step further, why should you even show your date of birth? What if there was a clever way of, or a piece of digital ID that could just show one piece of binary data, a yes for I'm over 18 or a no for I'm under 18? So all this is going to be possible. And blockchain and decentralized ID can play a big part in this. All of this is going to rely on open standards, and there have been several proposals. Over time, we've already developed worldwide standards for web pages and web resources, and so I'm sure it can be the same for creating and consuming web resources for ID. Okay, what you see here is part of one proposal. This has a DID document for a subject using a URI. This is sort of similar to a HTTP address for a web resource. And exactly like a web resource, this is publicly viewable on the web. So the line I've got highlighted at the top there is an address for the DID document. So if I was the subject of this DID document, I would give this to someone who wanted to verify something of mine. The line highlighted lower down is my unique public encryption key. So just to give you an example of one of the proposals for DID, and there are a number out there. So there's one more potential use case I'd like to mention right now, and one that's very topical, helping in situations of virus pandemics. I think it's fair to say that countries and cities around the world were unprepared for the COVID-19 outbreak that has taken hold this year, and governments are looking to technology to help find solutions. So the two main sub-use cases here are contact tracing and immunity passports. Contact tracing is where individuals are identified who have the virus right now, and then those they've been in contact with are informed so they can self-isolate. Some countries, including the UK, are looking at mobile devices and Bluetooth technology in order to do this. And to give an example of a real initiative, the World Health Organization has chosen to partner with leading technology and blockchain companies to build a distributed ledger platform to share data. The project's planned to be using IBM's Hyperledger Fabric, and the network aims to aid the exchange of data relevant to the pandemic. Together with analytic tools and large pools of data, the project aims to help citizens and public health officials track coronavirus hotspots. Now, an immunity passport would be a kind of certificate you receive to say you've had the virus, and in theory that you've built up some kind of immunity. The passport could be issued by a health authority, but stored locally on a mobile device and then shown to any interested party. Now again, data privacy and GDPR is a big concern. And so it would be great if a health organization issues a digital passport to an individual, publishes proof that they issued it in a public way, but without revealing that person's identity. Now, blockchain and self-sovereign ID could make that a reality. You could take a test, come back positive for antibodies, and a health authority would create a certificate and digitally sign it. And then, just like our example of the driver's license mentioned earlier, you would download it and store this credential on a special app on your phone. You can then show the certificate to someone who needs to see it, who can look up the details on the blockchain and establish that it's genuine, for example. No lookup on central databases, certificate held only by you, and it never leaves your possession. Okay, a slightly contrasting use case now, but one that's also very important to consider. So waste and recycling management can also benefit from all this technology. Automated waste devices could be connected so that pickups and management become easier. Instead of collection being always on a Monday or always on a Tuesday, sensors would alert authorities that bins are full, and collection routes would be dynamic and fluid. So these auto bins would be IoT devices, and identification and data handled by a blockchain in one form or another. Real-time location tracking of vehicles could also be managed on-chain, and all the different players in the system could be coordinated by way of business logic. And that logic would be written into audited smart contracts. And by the way, another model could arise here with flexible charging based on number of collections, and a market mechanism could naturally form. And again, on a data theme, reliable and transparent data could also be consumed by many other devices. Aggregation and data analysis could provide real-time insights into waste disposal patterns, for example, or they could feed into KPIs for how well recycling schemes are running. Okay, so we've mentioned quite a few use cases today already, but here are just a sort of few other different possibilities. Citizen participation. So blockchain is also well positioned to be the framework for voting and elections, as it gives full transparency and the potential for guaranteed anonymity. When city regulators need their people to vote, blockchain could be used to great effect. Now, one survey suggested that more than 65% of people considered that a greater network of open data would improve government accountability. Smart cities can develop with an emphasis on local, so providing services in close proximity to where you live and your place of work would create less travel further afield, could promote shared mobility such as buses, ride sharing and shuttle services. Getting out of the habit of one person in vehicles designed for 4 or 5 people is a key thing, something we see now every day. Also, a focus on local can also promote sort of a vision of uniqueness of neighbourhoods within our cities of the future. Air quality management. So air pollution is now affecting nearly all of us. An example of a company called eLichens is producing some sensing devices for analysis and prediction of air quality for smart cities. Again, an example of IoT devices generating extremely valuable data for consumption. So big data analytics. So we've touched on this one already, of course, but there's great possibilities from big data. Blockchains will either hold some data directly or act as pointers and verification for data held off-chain. Consensus from multiple players means data will be considered more accurate. Also, there is a cost to storing data on blockchains, especially on public chains. So we'll probably find that data is considered higher quality and more reliable than it is today. And the last point there at the bottom is an important one. So there's going to be many more, and most of which we haven't even thought of yet. So we've got all these possible use cases that we've talked about, but where do we start with all this? Where does this all begin? If we do a gap analysis of where we are now to a state where we've sort of realized some of these in the future, it's fair to say we're quite a long way off. It may actually be the case that the cooperation and coordination is the biggest challenge to making these things work, more than the technology itself. But just like more traditional projects, starting with experiments and proof of concepts is a positive start. So what you see here are companies that kind of got some current initiatives to address some of these areas. On the top left there, tolling.network is a pilot project based on IBM's Hyperledger that joins together drivers and various highways agencies in the US, offering an open source transaction system for using toll roads. Transponder devices in cars create on-chain transactions. Drivers and agencies can query those transactions online in a transparent way, and the project claims to have big value potential for saving agencies money through efficiency. So moving to smart energy, the European energy provider TenneT has developed a platform for energy trading. Energy for people's car batteries is consumed or replenished depending on their energy demands at any given time. And blockchain can handle all the buy, sell, and the admin without going through intermediaries. And a second example, Australian company Power Ledger have set up a working peer-to-peer system to buy and sell reusable solar energy in a small community, and use a token currency called the Sparks token for the trades. A working app on the residents' phones allows the participants in a community to view how much energy they've generated, how much they've used, and how it's used. And they can also view the trades of energy they've made and the price they sold it at. On parking, a company called ParkGene claims to have created the world's first peer-to-peer smart parking app, claiming to be like a kind of Airbnb for parking spaces. It is offering the services in Greece. Users can use crypto payments or traditional fiat currencies, and private parking areas can be tokenized as assets. It claims to have over 60,000 users, approximately, and that was towards the end of last year, 2019. There's also asset registry use case represented here. So earlier when we were talking about the tokenization of assets, I mentioned Georgia, and they're putting land titles on chain. So land titles have the address, name, and the mortgage status of the owners, and timestamps are recorded on the public blockchain. In collaboration with the tech company Bitfury, they've placed more than 1.5 million land titles on chain. And that was a statistic from 2 years ago, so I think that figure's probably a lot higher now. So I think a lot's been covered today in this relatively short time, and hopefully I've been able to highlight how blockchain and distributed ledger technology can be a key enabler for our smart cities of the future. And with that, this concludes the presentation part of our session today.
Daniel, many thanks for wonderful topic and wonderful story. And I believe that our audience is now, well, let's ask audience, what guys do you think about the topic? And actually on all our brown bag sessions, we are option for the discussion. So let's if you have questions, please shoot them and then I will answer that. And also, if you would like to discuss any of the use cases in particular, or if you have any use case in mind or any area or set of the use cases, please bring it in, and yeah, we would like to see that. Any questions? Seems, Daniel, you were crystal clear today. We don't have any hanging question. And yeah, in this case, I'd like to get a little bit of feedback and to hear, yeah, we have people raising hands, and that means that you can just unmute yourself. I'm trying to understand if, yeah, Maggie, you can unmute yourself and speak, I think.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much. A very, very interesting and informative presentation. I was wondering if you have any thoughts or elaboration on this technology for, let's say, because now we're talking about smart city use cases. How would they apply for, let's say, single smart building type of scenario? So like a micro version of some of the features that you talk about.
So I think one possibility there would be the energy use case. So there's a couple of real world initiatives that are kind of looking at energy exchange between units. So you could kind of take that down to a kind of a single building level. So I think at a micro level, the energy exchange is an important possibility for that technology. So taking it from kind of a macro level down to a micro level.
And I will get the opportunity to mention that we are going to look deeper in peer-to-peer energy trading use cases next month. In July 28, we will have the similar session where we will look at the use cases of the energy trading of the microgrids and who will benefit from the blockchain solutions and how the blockchain solutions can work in this case. And we'll look at a real life example starting from Brooklyn case, look at the power ledgers, and look at many other examples and real life initiatives. So for everybody who is interested, come to us on 28th of July. Where if somebody from a crowd now can add to the question of Maggie, you're welcome to speak, because where the question was about how the use cases are applicable for the single building in a smart city. And then I have already mentioned that energy trading should be relevant for that. I also believe that the cases of the tokenization and renting, they should be relevant in case of like building and apartments and probably usage of the public facilities in the building, because it can be big building with, I don't know, library, swimming pool. And we can imagine like the cases where there's pay-per-use and where the users are registered. But for the rest is parking.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, Sasha, I mean, if you this technology is obviously very, it's very early days, and the knowledge is increasing all the time. But these experiments could start very small, on a kind of a small community level. But so I think the real value is going to arrive when you're joining multiple stakeholders and you get like a kind of a network effect, and that's where blockchains in general are are going to benefit. But we've got to start somewhere. So yeah, why not have a single building or just a small group of people that can benefit with these use cases.
That would be easy to start in terms of the complexity of rolling out the type of the solutions. But for me, and I think the same as Daniel is mentioning right now, the real value will come with the size. So as like rolling outing measure, as while the temporary, I'm not saying like a proof of concept, but probably pilot usage, almost all of those use cases are having sufficient facility, like having mentioned facility can be applicable. But I'm afraid that the citizens or people in this building will benefit when it's bigger in scale, will really get the fruits.
Yeah, and I think that's gonna happen in a very unpredictable way as well. So as these things, scale up in a kind of in a way that maybe the internet or the communications networks evolved, it's going to kind of happen organically, I think. And I think that's the really interesting thing. No one really knows how this it's not like you've got an architect that's got sort of looking down upon all this stuff and designing every single element or component. It's kind of going to come together in a natural way. It's going to take a long time, but yeah, got to start small, got to start somewhere.
Well, actually, the one which like of the use cases which come up to my mind right now when I was starting to think about one building, but like building big enough, is the kind of the marketplace of the services. For example, taking kids to school or after school activities. Because generically, if people live in the same building, the kids likely go to the same school or to like daycare, which is close by. And probably they're going to after school activities in the same district. And yeah, it's common for parents to ask other parents or parents of friends to take care of kids for like short period of time when they're working. And I could imagine that those services, and in this case, use case would be kind of like marketplace of such a services, can be registered even for one building. And it can be also useful even for the one building because the chance you like go to the same school would be higher. And yeah, that's also another answer to the question.
Daniel, quick question on this use case we are discussing, one big building and then a lot of blockchain stuff. Having worked in a majority of these sectors and segments, IoT and parking and energy everywhere else, the key concern to me when it comes to these discussions is that ability to operate seamlessly across different providers. Now, it's no surprise, especially in UK here, where you can switch from one energy provider to the other, which means they need to be on the same, it's not necessarily platform, but the smart contracts have to have the same rules, similar rules, not same, if I may. What does it take, in your opinion, to kind of get there? Because you're looking at parking, you have their own world, you have energy world, and then you have your IoT devices, each coming with their own set of standards and rules and regulations.
Thanks. Thanks for the question, Uday. So the key to all of this is collaboration. So you've got to start with some kind of open agreed standards. So I think I mentioned one use case in that presentation, which is for tolling in the US. So that's so my understanding, they've got sort of a handful of highways agencies that they've got working together, and they've managed to agree on a kind of a set protocol, a set network. But one of the key issues there, of course, is that they're, in the real world, like energy agencies, they're looking for ways to make money, right? So their model is a kind of a competition model. So yeah, the key is collaboration. If you've got, say, I don't know, 50 energy suppliers, if you've just got a small number of those who can work on collaborating, then you've got to start. But it's quite difficult because everything is set. This is just my opinion as a in competition. So energy company A is trying to outprofit energy company B, and so it's kind of a hard sell, I would say, to make them kind of understand that in a longer term, everyone kind of benefits out of this. So they'll benefit with extra security on data, with transparency. Their consumers are going to benefit from all this, but from a lot of things I've kind of read, a few industries I think are going to disappear completely. So we've got energy providers now sitting between us and the the physical production of power, and we're going to need them at all. This is quite disruptive and technology, and I guess we hear that word a lot, disruptive. But in the case of blockchain, this is definitely going to affect a lot of industries.
And if I may, to add some technical side to your question, Uday, I would say that in parallel with incentivization and collaboration mechanisms on a business level, there are a lot of discussions about interoperability, about migration of the smart contracts from one version to another version, from one code to another code. So that's the alternative approach, because I could imagine, and I have seen the real solutions where together with like business term change, the existing smart contract for the particular individual, like there was like migration of the account from one smart contract to another smart contract with other terms. And that's costly operation, actually, from like technical point of view, but it's possible when business requires. So while businesses are making agreements and working on a common set of the data and common protocols, which we all know are quite lengthy process and quite painful. The technology solutions, and I have seen even in real life, like the proof of concept solutions of migrating smart contract from one energy provider to another energy provider. So those, like, it can be answered also on a pure technology level.
Yeah, because this coming from I did help put together a POC in the past for Sony Music, where we kind of pitched it saying, hey, here you will get rid of all the middlemen, so it's just you and the artist, so there's better payment and royalties for both sides. The place where it fell off was exactly this, where I work with different artists at a different time, and artists keep jumping. How do I keep this interoperability well in check? Now, this was the situation. I think I did this POC about 5 years ago. And this is just checking to see if we have come further from there or how far away are we from that pain point right now.
I would say that 5 years ago, I would also say it's impossible. But currently, with all the concepts of like sidechain, about like chain bridges, about the possibility to even transfer the transactions between heterogeneous, like between Hyperledger Fabric and Ethereum and back, I would say that technically it's possible if the system is designed properly. And there are quite some of the technology solutions. Again, I wouldn't be able to bring the examples of the code right now, but it's a very good topic, and we definitely would remember and come back in our brown bag sessions to the interoperability topic and to discuss possible interoperability patterns and their maturity.
Yeah,
Currently, I would say that I would give it a try, because I have seen quite some of working solutions. It really depends on the nature and the setup of the original system and how you do that and what you actually need. But I would say that quite some of the functionality is already interoperable.
No, because I think that's the central, to me, that's the core. As long as we nail the interoperability aspect, I think rest everything automatically falls in place, because you're then able to make the conversations of how easy it is, or security. I think people already agree it has a lot of good aspects to that. But I think when it comes to operationalizing it, that's where a lot of clients and customers I've spoken in the past have problems. And if we nail that, I think there is enough meat to chew on.
Well, I would say that confirm that we need that, it would be too much. But I would say that currently, like current year and probably half a year before and next year, there are indeed years of the production implementation. It's years where we are solving issues of maintainability, operability, interoperability. And currently there are enough patterns and working solutions to basically to nail that. And for example, next month, again, on 21st of July, we have a Microsoft session, and there would be brown bag over Azure blockchain technology, where quite some of the topics, okay, nearly to be resolved, all the key management, because again, for operational questions, a lot of topics of what if our users loses the key, how we should store this nightmare, and a lot of migration of contracts topics, a lot of operational questions would be covered. So welcome for those who are interested in the technology. But I would like to bring audience to the business topics. Ladies and gentlemen, bring us another discussion topic on a business level. What do you think about the smart city use cases? What looks for you the most important or closest to the real implementation? Daniel, probably something about Mac and 5G.
The open Wi-Fi networks, Sasha, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was actually a use case that I hadn't mentioned there. Is there's a location proposal out there that has kind of devices that create, instead of using the general GPS network, there are devices on the ground. So they're designed to kind of cover areas that the GPS network has trouble kind of getting to. And so I think one proposal had, you've got hundreds of individual devices. They're connected by 5G or whatever, but the owners of those units are kind of incentivized through a token mechanism. So if you're in town traveling, you can hook up to this network and get kind of instant location data that doesn't rely on the GPS network, and instead kind of hooks into this kind of ground level decentralized network. And then so the data flowing backwards and forward is all kind of tokenized. So the kind of owners of their devices are paid for setting them up and maintaining them. And then if you're consuming data, that you kind of pay for that service as well. So that's another interesting use case that wasn't mentioned specifically today. Just wanted to throw that one out there as well.
Daniel, sorry again, it's me. Do you know if we have done any research into exploring advertising industry with blockchain?
Not personally, Sasha. Have we done anything on those lines with EPADs?
We were not exploring that specifically. So like marketing solution, advertisement. I do know several networks which are used for like blockchain-based advertising, and I can probably after this session I share with you the names and those solutions. Like they were presented on Ethereum DevCon, and I've seen them for several years. But we were not looking to that specifically, at least not in a smart city case concept. And we do not have currently the separate set of the use cases in our portfolio for this. Probably it relates to our customer focus. But yeah, I will share the names, but we don't have specific view on this.
That's fine. Okay. No. Because there is targeted advertising, and then there is an addressable TV, which kind of is specific to an area what a user is seeing, which is in a way targeted to smart cities or how content is being consumed in a particular area. So.
I believe in our situation, those use cases would appear in a telco part of the like telco and CMT type of the portfolio. So it's for us would be more content management because we definitely were looking at the cases where with the distributed content management, with the fair reward for the content creators. And I do believe that those cases would be applicable for the advertisement industry and can be easily modified to that. But I'm repeating myself, we do not have currently anything specific.
That's fine. No, that's fine. In content management, I think there is I don't know, the telecom, I've been helping a couple of telecom guys on this. elove.io, if you've heard of them, they use blockchain for distributing content. They're working with MGM and a few other big production units. If you want to explore more in that side.
If you will post a name in our conversation, we will look at that because I'm actually struggling to spell it. Thank you.
That's fine. I just pinged it there, so you should have it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
More questions, or shall we conclude the session?
I have a single one especially about smart cities. I see an issue with collecting all the data from single points, and that sounds like a lot of equipment in places. And how do you solve the problem with the last mile? Is it 5G or some other networks? And how the devices with smart contracts connect to the endpoints? Do you have any answer on that? It's solved on exact on the field with exact data provider.
Yeah, that's kind of a I think that's a difficult question. Because I mean, as you've kind of touched upon, the infrastructure to support all this stuff is going to it's just not there yet. But yeah, it will. I think it will get there with 5G, with other technologies, and I think security is got to be built in there all the way. We've got to make sure that we're complying with regulations, with GDPR, with all those other considerations. So I think there's going to be a bit of a balance here between creating this transparency that the blockchain is promising, and at the same time, keeping our privacy as best we can, and complying with all the laws. And I think that the laws are going to have a hard time catching up with all this stuff. But sorry, I'm not sure if that answered your question. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but.
Okay, thank you. I think that it's an answer why I'm asking, because I have some background in gathering energy data from endpoints with energy, collecting information about energy gathering from end users like commodity service and so on, and we have a huge amount of problems with infrastructure by itself, not any software.
Specific to energy sector, I would mention that, for example, at EPAM, we have the pilot project right now of enabling smart meters with connection to like Wi-Fi and sending data to the data analytics. In Netherlands, we have quite some of the EPAM employees who have, USB dongles inserted to their smart meter, which, like, after the certain setup, gets your energy data to the data analytics platform. And we are currently now using like AI to analyze that and to create certain patterns. We like speaking about like peer-to-peer energy trading, we anyway will get into the smart meter with, for example, cryptocurrency wallet embedded, or with the connectivity. So to get data from a smart meter is not that complex task, although there are a lot of regulations around, and there are a lot of controlling companies. I would say it also brings us to the question how to trust a smart meter. And that brings to like more generic question, which all the energy companies currently are trying to resolve. But we are working on that on like a really daily basis. Like we currently having this pilot, and we are looking to the possibilities to extend the applicability. And we are working with the smart meter producers and looking to the possibilities there.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's what you covered there, Sasha. I think that brings us back to the identity subject again, and the trust element. So where you've got an incredible number of devices, we need to know whenever one device needs to talk to another, it needs to be identified. We need to know how to interact with it, how to trust it, where it came from.
Yep.
And so that we take that out of the hands of manufacturers and move that into more of an open system, and that's that the whole ID aspect is kind of an umbrella for all of these things, right? So the security is it'll come in time, but everyone's got to agree on the standards first. So maybe, and again, maybe the technology is the easy part. I don't know.
Daniel, Thomas here.
Welcome, Thomas. Yes, we can hear you.
Great presentation. But both of you, also Sasha. What is your, because you mentioned a number of use cases and say, for instance, in this typical smart city, it's all going to take place in one city. So what is your view on getting this ecosystem kind of governed and coordinated?
That's yeah, that's a key question, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, my own opinion is it's going to just happen. You know, it's going to happen organically. You know, the governance needs to be, you know, by definition, I think it's going to be distributed, and there's not, you know, we're not going to have like a one single architect or a team of architects that are kind of designing this system from the bottom up. It's you know, it's going to be it's going to be very well decentralized. So I think to plan the governance is quite difficult. But I'd say, you know, maybe start small. Just, you know, you need one agency to talk to another agency, and then this could grow organically. But the governance is an interesting one.
Yeah, reason for asking is also because, like for instance, Uday mentioned advertising, say, and servicing targeted content, and there's also you mentioned a lot of say services that are, say, quite unique and quite personal to the end user. And I can imagine, for instance, that you don't want to have any targeted ads like you were having in a regular, say, internet browsing experience. So these use cases could be kind of conflicting. So you should have kind of an agreement over how these use cases actually blend in on the same ecosystem. Because otherwise you could get, for instance, basically if you were to present yourself, or your car presents itself to a traffic light close to kind of maybe a nice dining venture, you may get ads based on your car being present close to that place.
Mm-hmm.
So would you see that as taken care of by any kind of coordination or governance, or should there be rules?
It's very hard to say. I mean, we have laws governing our cities right now, so we, you know, those laws need to keep up with the technology. So I guess it would, yeah, it needs some kind of coordination, but the honest answer is I'm not sure where that would come from as this, you know, as this stuff scales up and becomes more widespread. You know, it's a very important question, and the honest answer is I'm not sure, but it's, you know, we need to agree who makes the rules. So currently it's our local councils, it's government authorities, and likely it will continue that way into the at least the immediate future. But different models of governance are going to emerge. So we could see the DAO concept grow again. So kind of on-chain governance and voting mechanisms and all this good stuff could be governing all sorts of decisions in a very automatic way, I think.
and basically then also say rule out human beings, or?
Hopefully not. No, I wouldn't like to see it go that way. But you know, with the introduction of AI, that's an important moral question, I think. You know, where who makes the rules and who governs? But no, I think there should still be humans at the end of all this stuff. You know?
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah, I want to keep it like that. Thank you,
Thomas. To your question, I mean, partly in terms of really looking at scale, maybe it's a concern or the number of players involved, but I'm sure you have heard the country of Estonia, they have implemented everything end to end. So they have figured it out. But probably it's because of the scale or it's the number of players that are involved, etc. The model will evolve from something like that. You can't go big bang. You can't go fully out there. But you probably have to look at some aggregators who bring in a common functionality and then lay down your smart contracts on top of it, which then effectively should attract more people on board. And that's capturing one pole at a time than just saying, are we going to do this? Because no one will take the responsibility of it if it falls apart. So I think that's pretty much the pushback in most cases right now.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Meanwhile, we also had extra question from Maggie, and she was asking about some government experiments and activities, like on a scale of one city, or and I have mentioned, and I provided some links. There are quite some of done in blockchain in Netherlands in the city of Groningen. Thomas, you should be aware about this. And I've also posted a link from Singapore, where there is quite rich blockchain landscape of the solutions. This is quite popular. I've been doing about a year ago research across Netherlands, and I've seen that majority of the city halls in Netherlands were either looking at some blockchain applications, either users like citizens were asking if the town hall can do something, and the users were proposing the use cases. In Netherlands, like almost every city hall has like habit to ask the citizens of the particular part of the country if they have an opinions or what projects they propose. And about half of the projects proposed by citizens were about use cases which were like really good use cases for blockchain solutions. And in some cases, some cities were responding on that, and quite pioneering one was like city of Groningen. But yeah,
really
there are a lot of
interesting.
initiatives. Yeah, well, there are a lot of initiatives happening in Asia too. That's like, yeah, if we will look at that like with a certain precision, we will see that it's happening everywhere. And yeah, it's not possible to forget about Estonia, where it's done on a country scale. And basically, they are providing the platform for the whole country, and all the government services are done on a blockchain solution, hardware blockchain solution. But also, like the individual cities are also incorporating their services on this backbone.
I mean, it's interesting, partially because I'm just curious also about sort of like what kind of percentage of adoption or in network will it take for it to take off really as a standard. I mean, it's really interesting to see the different cities and how the ecosystem is growing, but I think for average citizens to really understand and to opt in, there has to be some sort of steps, I guess. And
Paradigm
government,
shift, yes.
yeah, and governments are a huge part of that layer, I guess. First, for maybe setting up the standards or sort of like a framework, but then allowing for either businesses and also individuals to plug into it.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. My personal belief is we do expect quite paradigm shift in a society, which means that, well, I'm actually expecting movies, cartoons, series on a like about blockchain solutions, about cyber networks, cryptocurrency. I really expect that to grow a lot to prepare the society to digest the message, to understand the decentralization points, to bring that in a culture. And I'm pretty sure that, for example, my grandparents wouldn't get that quickly, but I think our kids will digest it much quicker if they will see like cartoons and then, you know, anime movies. And well, there are some of them, but I do believe that well, the industry will give us more and more. And that's together with some government regulations and some official papers will bring a society to the necessary state.
Thomas here. But would you say that the typical developed countries, they are at a disadvantage? Because Estonia actually basically made their whole government digital and blockchain or digital ledger powered. Most probably because they only had a paper administration to replace.
It's difficult for me to judge like this. I wouldn't ever mention Estonia as developing country. And I would say, I don't know what was the initial state. I do believe that it's just a small enough country to bring the solution like statewide, like for United States or for any like big country. That would be the challenge. And Estonia is a relatively small country, and I do believe that just the control there is, it was, yeah, probably that's, no, I don't know how to answer this question. Actually, like, what is the reasoning why they're pioneering? Probably just coincidence, right time, right solution, right people at a place. But I would never say that they're a developing country.
No,
And
no,
I also would mention that many developing countries have advantage for blockchain adoption because there is eagerness, there's a demand for the centralized services, for the centralized money sense, and for all like for again cryptocurrency adoption, and that's where it starts, and that's where it prepares the society. And here the paradigm shift is much faster. Like currently we see, yeah, we can see that the cryptocurrency usage rate is higher in the developing countries.
Yeah, but basically it's still hard to actually pay your groceries at the supermarket with it.
Yeah,
so
still.
No, it's just an open question. So it's because I can in the typical developed world, I can see a lot of initiatives, but these are basically private, say private institutions, basically, or kind of collaborations between private institutions, so private companies. Whereas in a let's call it that way, slightly lesser developed countries, where there's a lot to gain actually from maybe untransparent government processes. You see a lot of the fundamental groundwork of for societies being done.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd agree. Sorry, Thomas.
Yeah.
I'd agree. I just wanted to say I agree with that as well. I think that it's the trust aspect, which is which I think is the big motivation for this stuff. You know, I guess you could say that, you know, if you're a citizen of a less well-developed country, then you have, you know, then trust is more of an issue for you, right? In you know, if you buy a house, is my document going to be safe? Am I going to be able to sell it? And then if it's quite easy in the Western world for us to, you know, just be, you know, we have, I think in general, we have trust in our, you know, in our government authorities, and you know, there's almost going to be a kind of proportional relationship, I think, between some of this innovation and what trust level there is in a society. But you mentioned the network thing as well. So, you know, is it easier to start something from scratch? And I think it is. I spent some time living in Kazakhstan in Central Asia, you know, where you've just gone from nothing to, you know, to kind of, you know, good networks, and they've done that very quickly. And in you know, in European countries, you kind of got to rip out the, you know, the existing infrastructure sometimes to you know, to get to the new. Although having said that, you know, things do scale up. You know, we've got you know, fast broadband internet, which is, you know, a lot of the time just running on old copper wires, which is about, you know, a century old. So so you can kind of scale it up. But I think in some ways the developed countries have got a bit more of an advantage. They can kind of start from a clean slate.
I want to build on that also. For I mean, if you think about digital banking, you know, in China, where there was the jump was not as big in terms of, you know, you still had large populations of people who were very much cash based, you know, like money under the mattress, and for, you know, the first going to digital, then going to sort of WeChat wallet or Alipay, is it didn't take that much to get that started, because so many people were left out of the official banking system.
So that is indeed a kind of a more natural evolution. Whereas, for instance, if you have a well-organized infrastructure, for instance, power infrastructure or even traffic infrastructure, you may have to kind of incentivize the incumbent parties to actually look at their clientele or maybe their own business cases differently.
And in the US, it's still very paper. I mean, there's still checks, you know, being issued.
I know.
Paper checks.
No, I was just asking myself those questions. So is it because I see a lot of opportunities, but there is in general more trust in the supporting structures in the society for developed countries, and that makes it sometimes harder to look at alternatives.
And Sasha, one of the use case, I think EPAM already works with a lot of parking providers, cashless parking providers. There is a lot of gap when it comes to the way transactions are dealt with the council or the municipality, and then how the parking providers pay the council back for using their spots. That's maybe another area you may want to focus on.
You can just
where we are looking at. Yes.
Okay.
You can just write your own smart contract for that.
Perfectly spot. Like, we started all these topics and something with the parking use case, and it was like the most real for us, because like we had like a real demand and a real customer asking us to look at a parking solution.
Yeah, because I think there is the way I worked with the parking provider, US, Europe, and UK specifically. So some places there is one provider who's like the leader in it. So if you knock their door, you pretty much have the control of almost all of that region or the country for that matter. UK, for example, is majorly owned by Ringo. Now, if you get in the good books of Ringo, you want to implement this, you're actually looking at implementing pan UK, because Ringo has I think 80% stake partner ownership in all parking providing facilities. That's another way of approaching it. So that way you kind of are able to standardize what you're doing and then bring the other players on board.
Well, then we're striking the heavy question is 80% means heavy centralization. And then the motivation to decentralize that is, well, that's the tough way to go. It's much easier to approach the smaller and more dynamic companies who are approaching the market than to work on a decentralized solution with the heavy centralized market leaders. First of all, because they already invested millions of perfecting their centralized solutions.
Yes, but Alexandra, if we're looking at the smart city ecosystem, parking providers are only one of the category of participants.
Yes.
So we could basically on a typical smart cities in a smart cities ecosystem, we could have one, say, parking spot provider, and say running the network basically together with the local traffic control or management agency.
Yes, it's
so
true.
then,
That's why we are working on those use cases, because it's actually what for us they were the more hardware providers for their for the parking vendors, but that's basically that's why we still have space to work there, and that's basically that is real life. And I would say that the most live, at least for EPAM right now, the use case from all the smart cities is parking and traffic control. Those are probably it's the highest demand we can see right now.
Yeah, because also and that fits nicely with basically where the iron goes. So basically, traffic is all over the city. Parking places are also all over the city. So you have an ecosystem that is well spread, which can serve.
It looks logical. It might be it's because our client pattern is like this. And I'd like to touch briefly on Maggie's question about how much is readiness and what are the projects. I'm afraid we do not see the complete picture. I would say with this question, I probably will turn my face to analytics platforms like Gartner, IDC, and see what results they will show us by the end of year. Because we here cannot be the real authority, because we see what we see. And we're sure that it's not a whole world. We can probably see some similarities, some patterns, but this all heavy connected to the real delivery work we were providing to our clients. We also do have startup radars, and we do have research departments who are looking at this, but still we do not have statistics for the whole world. And I hope that the analytics do their job well.
Just want to make just one more point there. So we touched on, again, centralization with, okay, we approach, Ringo, but is that really desirable because they're a huge player? And is that, does it kind of go against the ethos of being decentralized? But I think, these big entities now, they're realizing, they're clever enough to realize that this is quite disruptive stuff. I mean, if we look at what Facebook are doing with, proposing their cryptographic currency, Libra, so they're clever enough to understand that they're not going to be able to control this thing and kind of sit on it all for themselves. They created it was their initiative to create a consortium of about 25 to 30 players who they were planning to kind of collectively run a network. So I think hopefully the days of kind of monopolizing things are, you know, these big corporations are kind of, you know, they're realizing that this is really disruptive stuff. So it's, but it's going to be interesting to, you know, there's going to be a little battle going on, I think, in the next few years between our classic corporations trying to, you know, swamp up all the competition, and the kind of the realization that kind of spreading all this stuff out amongst many players is actually in everyone's benefit, including theirs. But yeah, there's a bit of a philosophical point, but it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, I think.
Well, I think it's a very good conclusion of the talk today. And that's basically, we've looked at multiple use cases. We can see quite some of the perspective, and we know the current state of the maturity, and we can also, like, we've discussed some motivations here and some possibilities here, and we all shared this uncertainty about the speed with which adoption will go, but we all kind of sure that that will happen. And the question is just like, how fast and when actually this will be all live. And that's also thanks to you, Daniel, of sharing the real life examples, because we all know that it's not like starting in the future, it's already exists and being used in production. And that's important for us. That means that the job we do on a daily basis has a demand behind. And well, that brings us to the situation where well, probably we're at the end of our time today. If we'd like to keep the discussion, we still have like 12 minutes. But for the rest, I've enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you, Daniel, for wonderful topic and a great presentation. Speaking from like community side, we will publish the video most likely tomorrow, and we also will send a PDF document and being presented today to all of you by mail. And stay with us, stay connected. We will keep giving our brown bag sessions twice a month. And if you are interested in a particular topic, let us know. We have discussion boards on communities side. Let us know what you would like to see, and we will try to satisfy the demand.
Thanks everyone for joining today. Have a great day.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for the great questions.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.